Welcome back to Son of Chelsea. Chelsea's Champions League dreams still alive thanks to the right boot of Reece James and the beautiful hair of Marc Cucurella. I'm Daniel Charles. This is my thoughts, feelings, breakdown and everything in between regarding last night's 1-0 win over Manchester United at Stamford Bridge. My voice, thank God, has recovered to be able to do this review. That seems like a consistent theme, but probably a good thing, being inside the bridge. And the first thing that comes to mind is how wonderful the atmosphere was, especially towards the end, how much the players responded, how much they really gained off the crowd, and how much the crowd really backed the players through what could have been a very, very bad night, I think. And we'll delve into that. I think my instant kind of short analysis of the game is that points matter. And that's effectively it. I mean, the performance was not anywhere close to the substance and quality and kind of overwhelming positivity that you could look at for the Liverpool game or even some other wins recently. This was a moment game. This was a game that Chelsea simply just had to find a way to win. Against a team, if we're being honest, Chelsea rarely find ways to win. And if you look at the last two Stamford Bridge games against Man United, I don't think in either you could sort of look at it and go, yeah, Chelsea absolutely deserved to win that game, and it was a thoroughly convincing victory. It actually was based on just like genius moments of inspiration at the Harding end that made the difference, and that was the case in this game. Obviously not quite as dramatic as last season. I think you'd have to go some way, but it was very, very tense. And I think it is credit again to the players and for Chelsea to just find a way through. And I think there is some credit to Maresca that I'll get to, because I found some of his post-match comments quite interesting. And whether you agree with them or not, I think they are quite interesting. But listen, we've won the game. And now we've got two finals left. Next week, it's the final to ever we qualify for the Champions League against Nottingham Forest. And then, of course, the final in Wroclaw. So, as we always do, let's look at the starting lineup. I was a little bit surprised by the starting lineup, I have to say. The main thing that shocked me, I don't know what shocked me more, whether Tosin coming in for Chalobah or Tyreek George starting. I think in the end, you'd probably say Tosin, because we kept a clean sheet and the defence, especially in the latter stages of the game, really locked the game down, is probably a bigger positive than George, who I think really struggled to get himself within the game. But that surprised me a bit. No Lavia, no Chalobah. Restarting obviously turned out to be a big thing for Chelsea in this game, and seeing him start as a right back was brilliant as well. But yeah, I was just a little bit curious about that. I think Trev, I have to admit this, I am biased towards Trev, but I do think Trev objectively has been performing at a very high level. This was a huge game. The only way I could sort of see justifying it was from set pieces, which, to be honest, worked. If you don't take into account the fact that Maguire was inches away from putting United in front, thanks to automated offside. We'll get to that. And then the rest of the team was pretty self-explanatory. I was happy to see Noni on the left, Palmer kind of playing that number 10 role, Neto, Fernandes, Caicedo, Colwell, Cucurella, James, and obviously Sanchez along with Tosin. United went a lot stronger than many of us anticipated them to. I mean, they pretty much put out an 11 that I could see start next week. I mean, I'm not a United fan, thank God, so I don't know if there was any other players that maybe people felt would go into that starting lineup. But I mean, it pretty much was a starting lineup for them. Andre Onana, Harry Maguire, Victor Lindelof, Mazraoui, Fernandes, Casemiro, Dorgu, Mount, Ahmad, Højlund. I mean, that's pretty close to what you'd think a United strong 11 would look like, with the options currently there for Ruben Amorim. And we can all throw up hands and say, oh, isn't it frustrating because Spurs put out basically a much weaker team. But that's the opponent you have to play, and they were 16th in the league. Now, I have to say, for about 70 minutes, that performance from Chelsea was very concerning. I don't think there's any point me sitting here and saying anything other than that, because I just was very, very concerned that Chelsea on the ball looked very devoid of ideas of how they were going to get through United. But then also I was very concerned by, there were times you were looking at that game, especially more so in the first half than the second half. And it didn't surprise me that Chelsea took a firmer grip the later the game went on, because United made subs. I think there's probably just a natural psychological tendency of those United players. They don't want to overexert themselves because they don't want to get injured for the Europa League final. But in the first half, I mean, it was hard to tell who was 16th and who had nothing to play for. I think we've got to be brutally honest about that. I don't know if it was nerves. Some people have suggested that, Maresca was very, I think the Expected Chelsea put out quite an extensive thread about this. Maresca, he's very about in these big games against big opponents, keeping it tight, keeping it controlled. But I don't quite buy that based on how at least the first 50 to 60 minutes played out. It wasn't a case where Chelsea was so rigid defensively, United had no looks, and it was basically a bit of a dead game. That could be argued post us scoring and making sure that United didn't get any looks at goal to get back into the game. But we can't really sit here and say that the first 50 to 60 minutes were a shutdown defensively and Chelsea looked kind of clinical or kind of dangerous on the break. It was the complete opposite. United had much of the ball. They looked comfortable in possession. Obviously, Harry Maguire had that chance and that goal ruled out. Very concerning how easily United looked to be able to get the ball from. It was a great cross by Ahmad, but it comes from a set piece cleared, and then on the second phase of the set piece, Chelsea again almost being done on that aspect, which I think was very poor. I thought the way the wing backs in United system seemed to overlap and really hurt Chelsea. It seemed like, especially on the left side where Reece was, either because he was inverting, there seemed to be. Defence of Chelsea was quite narrow. It felt like there was a lot of space there. Now, United, in terms of XG, if you look at the shots, they didn't do a lot in the game. But again, you kind of always factor in, if a better opponent has those opportunities. And just because everything going into this game about how bad United have been in Chelsea, you want to see a big performance at home. You never quite got that. I mean, the closest we got in the first half was that Reece James volley, which, I mean, would have been an incredible goal. It really would have hit the post. It was on replay, especially behind Reece. But other than that, I thought Tyreek George had a really difficult night, especially against a physical Man United defence. I thought the wingers in Chelsea system, Madueke and Neto, didn't have great evenings, especially in the first period of the game. Despite having Caicedo, who had to do so much work on his own, I don't think Fernandes really exerted himself in the best way. There didn't seem to be a control in Chelsea's game, especially in central midfield. It wasn't like the Liverpool game where we gave up possession, but then once we had possession, there was definitely more of a sense of urgency. And I guess, you cast your way back all the way to the transfer window last summer. The failure to get a centre forward is unacceptable from the sporting directors, and I think that you've seen that exploited time and time again when the players have been injured, like Jackson and Guiu, and even in this game with Jackson suspended, where you have to play a false nine system against a back five. It just doesn't work, and I think it's asking a lot of Tyreek George to play that role against an opponent and the stakes so high, which is why I sort of thought it was more likely that Neto, Palmer and Madueke would be the front three, and maybe you play Palmer in that central role. So I don't want to, obviously George dived in the second half and we had the penalty ruled out, which was clearly never a penalty. But for a lot of that game, it looked like Chelsea's season was about to come to an end. I have to be honest. There were vibes of Fulham. Chelsea just didn't seem to be in sync, in harmony. There didn't seem to be a sense of momentum. And this is the mad thing about football. Moments, especially at this stage of the season, moments from individual players can make all the difference. We can talk about tactics, we can talk about automatisms, we can talk about field tilt, we can talk about inverted all you want. At the end of the day, you have an extraordinary talent in Reece James, who can provide moments, as we've seen throughout his Chelsea career, unfortunately not enough because of his injuries, that can, in one fluid motion, change the whole outlook of the game. And that fundamentally was this game. It was Chelsea not looking, I mean, I know we had a big chance after the first goal, but fundamentally, I did not see how Chelsea were going to be able to score in this game. United looked pretty much up for it. Structurally, they had hurt Chelsea in terms of, against back fives. Maresca really, really struggles. He really does. And I think in the transfer window, we have to address that. Either getting a more physically dominant or just better striker. Chelsea need to find a way to get round this, because unless you are having moments of genius and you're relying on Cucurella to be there inside the 6-yard box, which has been very effective in 2025 and this season. But, obviously Chelsea need a bit more. Reece, I mean, it was like time stopped. It was the turn heard across the world. He turns one way, he turns the other, he sends Garnacho back to Manchester. And it was remarkable, just a fluid motion. And correct, this is the genius of a player like Reece James, and why for all your systems, when you have players like that, they completely turn around the game. He turns on from his left to his right, and then he bends this ball, chips this ball perfectly as it dips onto the head of Marc Cucurella, who has been there all season in that position. I think back to the massive goal he scored earlier in the year against Brentford, which was a big game where Chelsea were really struggling to score, and he was inside that 6-yard box. We think about the goal he scored against Leicester. He has scored so many important goals for Chelsea across the course of this season. And I think, talking about James first, I mean, James has been on such a difficult path, and it was ironic that Thomas Tuchel was watching, not only because it was a right back crossing for a left back to score, because I know inside Tuchel was probably smiling, but you think back to when Reece was at his best. The peak of Reece James at Chelsea was when he was such a dominant threat. He was scoring goals, he was creating opportunities, and it was under Thomas Tuchel in like 2021 really. That was kind of the peak of Reece James. And I know we've had some good moments since, but really it has been stop, start, and a lot of stopping really in terms of him being out of the team. And of course, there has been this conversation that we've had about whether Maresca has done the right thing of playing him in a more central role. But, if Chelsea get through this and Reece gets through this, I know there was a moment in the first half where he was on the floor after a challenge and we were a bit worried he wasn't going to be able to continue. If he can get through this and start to flourish and get more fitness and confidence in his own body again, we always say this, we come back to the same thing about Reece James all the time. He is a difference maker. In a game like this, when you have a player like that who with one fluid motion, with one kick of his right foot, can change the whole outlook, not only of this game, but potentially of Chelsea's entire season, you have to try and make that player work, because they are geniuses, they are difference makers, they are priceless in football, they really are. And I think for Reece, you could see how much it meant to him, not only because he's Chelsea, because he's one of our own, because he's the captain, because he wants this so desperately. You can clearly tell it means a lot to him, because I'm sure mentally it has been such a difficult road since 2021 when he won that Champions League, when it felt like nothing was going to stop him. And then to all the injury setbacks, to all the moments and false dawns we've had of Reece, to now where he's had to wait and bide his time, and probably even in himself has been a bit frustrated, maybe not playing as much. I'm sure every competitive footballer wants to play big games. But if it works, we have reintegrated him in the best way possible. And I think that will be the thing in reflection people will look back on. It's, at the end of the day, you can only look at these things in hindsight, especially as a fan, right, who's not inside Cobham, who isn't speaking to the medical staff, who doesn't have that kind of intricate knowledge of what's going on day to day. We can only see what goes on over a period of time and then judge that. And I think really Reece James as a right back is where he needs to be at Chelsea. Does he play that ball as an inverted midfielder? Arguably, as a central midfielder. It's not like we haven't seen Enzo Fernandez pick up those positions. But I think most of us naturally know the common sense answer in football, not always, but a lot of the time is the right one. And the common sense answer with a player like Reece James is to have him at right back. So I think that obviously is the big thing moving forward for Chelsea, and hopefully he can have another big impact next week at Forest, and then have another big impact in Wroclaw, and then move into the Club World Cup and next season. I still think you have to manage him properly, but the good thing is you have Malo Gusto, you have Josh Achimpong coming through, so you have options to rotate that you clearly didn't have a couple of years ago. That was the big problem as well for Reece. When he went down, it was literally no one else in the team who could play his role. On the case of Cucurella, I mean, I keep on saying this. I really don't think we have seen a transformation of a reputation of a player so severe from negative to positive. And he's the top scorer in 2025. I'm happy for Cucurella. I really think a guy who I gave a lot of scrutiny, criticism. And listen, nearly all of us did. And I don't think we were unfair at the time, because the performance level of this guy in his first year at Chelsea was horrendous. But in some ways, it's an example of not writing off players too soon. He is kind of, I'm not saying it always happens, but in some cases, you do see a rapid turnaround of a player if you give them time, confidence, maybe adjusting to their new environment, and very much gaining the confidence in themselves. And you see a player in Cucurella who has matured a lot at Chelsea, who's taken on more responsibility. I really do think Chelsea, if they get over the line next week, I will be looking at Marc Cucurella and Moises Caicedo. Obviously, Caicedo, outstanding again, covering every blade of grass. It felt like in the first half, it was basically Caicedo against Man United. He has been absolutely insane this season. But Cucurella has been a valid number 2. He very much has been that player that has been dogged, determined, obviously from a creative point of view, from a scoring point of view, has been outstanding, so crucial for Chelsea, stepping up in very difficult moments and finding the killer goal when Chelsea desperately need it. Probably no bigger than last night. However, I think just in his defensive ability, in his work rate, in his kind of physical demeanour, in his kind of confrontational nature too, that kind of makes him feel like a little bit of a throwback Chelsea player too, and I think why many people have started to see him a bit more as a cult hero and very much warmed to Cucurella this season. So, Cucurella very much has been a star this year for Chelsea, and probably few people would have predicted that. No one would have predicted that about 2 years ago, but few even would have predicted that at the start of this season. I think obviously he had a strong end to last year, obviously went to Spain, with Spain to the Euros and had an incredible time there. I don't think many of us would have anticipated he'd be kind of like a leading goal scorer for us, which is not a great sign of our attacking output. However, listen, if we get there, we get there, and we'll think about it later, basically. If we'll think about it for next season. And what a great run. Right back to left back. As I say, took a watching on, it was written in the stars. The way Chelsea saw out this game was brilliant. They kept it in United's half. Madueke should have buried that chance. I mean, for his finishing quality, I expected him to hit the target. That would have made the remaining minutes a lot more safer. But I have to give some credit to Maresca, because I think, he's very much locked down these games consistently. You think about the way Chelsea defensively dealt with Liverpool after Van Dijk scored, when it could have been very tense in those closing minutes. We shut down that game. We shut down the game at home to Spurs. We've shut down this game as well. I think it's a good sign, right? It's a good sign that Chelsea defensively, we went through a period where we just couldn't hold on to a lead late on, even against the teams like Man United. I remember a few years ago, I think Potter was in charge at that time, where we scored in like the 89th minute and somehow still conceded in the 95th minute. There's not that happening here. Even United, when they wanted to go forward, when they wanted to try and play direct, thanks to someone invading the pitch invader kind of trying to stop United scoring, and getting himself a lifetime ban for his duty. But other than that, I thought Chelsea locked it down very well. Malo Gusto came on, Romeo Lavia came on as well. So Chelsea just had to get the job done. And you felt that inside the stadium. It felt like the crowd very much was willing the team on, pushing the team through. And I felt the way they dealt with 7 minutes at a time was expert, keeping it in the corner, frustrating United, winning fouls, getting the ball in really awkward areas, making United, especially United, once they made those subs later on to take off bigger players, and they brought on some more inexperienced players, you very much felt like they didn't quite know what to do to build up, and Chelsea were pressing. So good to see that intensity so late on in the game. I thought the referee was atrocious. I thought, Chris Kavanagh truly was just abysmal from start to finish. Chelsea arguably could have had a penalty in the first half. People pointed out that the penalty that George didn't get was similar to the Delap one. I mean, it's not a penalty for me. And sure, we can moan about consistency all we want. I just thought all around his lack of consistency throughout the game, stopping mainly for Man United players, but then when similar happened against Chelsea, it seemed like he wasn't as willing. Just really, really shocking officiating, but it's the PGMOL, and Chelsea get away with it and only have to deal with PGMOL officiating for one more weekend this season, and hopefully it doesn't cost us next week. Other than that, huge 3 points. I mean, hopefully the curse of Man United is slowly starting to be broken down by Chelsea. They didn't beat them away from home. We have to win at Old Trafford next season, but we are starting to beat them at home again, which obviously is huge. The only other thing I wanted to point out, that Maresca made a point in his post-match comments of talking about how Man United had set up in other big games, talking about the way Man United had set up against Man City, who of course they beat away from home in December and drew at home, wasn't it in March or April time, quite recently. And he talked about that, like the Liverpool games as well, where they went away to Anfield and got a point there as well. I think it's quite interesting, right? Because it's this weird dynamic where you suspect Chelsea against 16th place at home, how horrendous Man United have been all season, how bad they've been, that surely Chelsea just rock up and be able to win this game confidently and really expose Man United's frailties. But there is that psychological difference. I assume in that Man United dressing room there might be some confidence because of the record against Chelsea, and also because of the record they've had in big games. And I guess there is just a tension. There's always going to be that high stakes, different demeanour to a Man United game compared to Fulham at home, compared to any of the mid-table teams, Palace at home, right? It's always going to be different, and that those levels get raised. And I think maybe there was a bit of tension within the Chelsea dressing room because they knew it was basically win or bust, because Villa did the job quite easily against Spurs. But we can moan all we want about and say Chelsea weren't that good for about 70 minutes. I said this after Newcastle, right? It doesn't really matter. At the end of the day, when you're at this stage of the season, points are all that matter. I don't care about moral victories. I don't care about playing well and not getting the win. I'd rather have a scenario like last night where we play crap, but then we have 1 minute of genius and that gets us over the line, and playing well and everyone talking about how well we played, but we didn't get the points and our season ended. I'd rather that scenario, obviously. In the long term, you want a better level of performance, but big games are what they are, and it's good that we got over the line. So now we go into the final day. We'll have to see how the rest of the weekend goes. Obviously, Newcastle playing Arsenal. We'll see how Man City do. Forest are playing West Ham. Fundamentally, you can't really think too much about that. It is what it is, what happens elsewhere. Chelsea have a very simple task, and I think it will be the task no matter kind of what the results are this weekend. It's winning against Nottingham Forest, and if we win, we win, we get the Champions League, and the season will be a success. So God knows what the performance level is going to be like, but if Chelsea can find a way over the line, I'll be happy with that. Please let me know your thoughts, your feelings, all of that good stuff as ever in the comments below. If you've liked this show, please share it around with friends, get more people involved in the Son of Chelsea community. If you're listening, please do give us a positive rating review. Really helps us out on the podcast to get it to more ears and get more people involved as well. Thank you for watching. Follow me across the socials at Son of Chelsea, and thank you for listening. And I'll see you again very soon. Have a great weekend. Up the Chelsea.